All right, in this, my last video for the social psychology chapter, there's a lot in the social psychology chapter. I did have to make decisions about what to include and what not to include. There were some things that I am not going over. I'm going to say what I keep saying. If you're interested in stuff in the book that I'm not going over in the videos, take further classes in social psychology. There's just so much to try to cram in there. All right, so in this last video, we're going to be talking about essentially helping behavior. We're going to be talking about prosocial behavior and altruism. Now, first, we have to define prosocial behavior. A lot of students aren't familiar with that particular term. You might have heard the term antisocial, but you might have heard it used incorrectly. A lot of times people hear antisocial and it means like you don't want to go out, you don't want to hang out with your friends, you're against being social. But antisocial behavior actually has to do with harmful behaviors that go against the common good of our group, of society. The goal of harming others. So like aggression, which we talked about, that would be an antisocial behavior. So prosocial behavior, it's behavior carried out with the goal of helping others. All right, so that's your nice, kind type of behavior. When we look at prosocial behavior, a lot of times we try to figure out, hey, how can we maximize that? How can we increase that? How can we increase the stuff that helps other people? Now, another related term that we need to define is altruism. Altruism, or to be altruistic, this is behavior that is carried out with the goal of helping others without concern for one's own safety or self-interest. And some people will use terms like true altruism, like truly selfless altruism. One classic example that's near and dear to my heart as a fan of Captain America, Steve Rogers as Captain America. Not that I'm not excited about I keep wanting to say the actor's name. Anthony Mackie's actor's name. Can't think of his name. You know who I mean if you're a Marvel fan. But you know, the origin in the first Avengers movie, when Steve Rogers jumped on the grenade to try to save everybody with no concern for his own safety. That's like your example of true or pure altruism. Now, the thing with altruism is a lot of times we wonder if anybody ever does anything truly selflessly like that. Because what we probably have is a lot of examples of reciprocal altruism. Reciprocal meaning back and forth. This is the idea that people carry out altruistic acts because they want to get paid back, essentially. They're hoping that it's going to come back to them, kind of, you know, like karma, or, you know, I scratch my back, I scratch your back, you scratch my back, sort of thing. So people engage in altruistic acts because of the expectation of being the recipient of altruism in the future. Or they remember being helped in the past, and that's why they do it. They feel like they owe it to the world to pay it back in some way. All right, so there is debate about whether we engage in truly selfless acts, or if we do it because we're hoping that if we help out people, we will be helped in the future, or we remember being helped. All right, but regardless of the reason that we do it, that's what altruism is. And we've conducted a variety of research trying to figure out what is correlated with people's likelihood of behaving altruistically. Now, in the area of research on helping, one relevant topic is something called the bystander effect. So the bystander effect. A bystander is somebody, a witness, you know, somebody who is watching something happen. In this case, we're talking about bystanders to a situation where someone would need help, and trying to figure out, are these people, or as an individual person who's a bystander, will they help? The bystander effect has to do with the fact that the greater the number of witnesses, the lower the likelihood of any one of them helping. You are less likely to be helped when there are more people around. What the heck is that about? Well, researchers who have looked at this, and there are two big names in this area are Latine and Darley, which I think I've talked about previously when we were talking about maybe research, but these are big names in social psychology. And they're in studying the bystander effect, one thing that they proposed is that this could be a reflection of something we call diffusion of responsibility. Think diffusion, spreading out, becoming weakened, diluted. All right, so if there's just one person to witness an event, like maybe somebody falls and perhaps they need help, there's just one person around, all the responsibility is on them to help. So they feel more pressure to help this person out, because if they don't help, nobody's going to do it. But if there are like 10 people around, you're like, hey, all of us have 1/10 the responsibility. So you're like, hey, I might not take responsibility, but there's 9 other folks here who could help out. Surely one of them is going to do it. And then if we all think that way and then nobody helps, the person doesn't get any help. And so we do have support for this effect in research, where they created scenarios, fake situations where someone would need help or there was an emergency in some way. In one, they had a room filling with smoke to see if people would report the smoke. More people around, they're more likely to let the room fill with smoke. We also had a situation where people were on a group phone call and one person acted like they were having a seizure, and more people on the group phone call, less likely it was that they would report that someone maybe needed medical attention. They also did things like out in the field where people fell over on a sidewalk, like maybe they were having a medical crisis. And again, more people passing by, the less likelihood that people would intervene. You may also be familiar with sort of a classic case that's often discussed in the context of the bystander effect, and it actually involves a murder case from middle of the 20th century, I want to say the 1960s, and the victim was Kitty Genovese, and this case was described for a variety of factors, and the thing that they got attention for was this woman was stabbed to death in broad daylight near her apartment building, and the numbers differ depending on what source I look at, but they were about 37 bystanders or potential witnesses, people who could hear what was going on, but nobody called for help, or that was the way it was reported. We now have some controversy that the story might not have been reported accurately, but the way it was reported, people were trying to figure out why this woman was screaming for help. Why did nobody call for help? And so that sort of situation inspired researchers like Latine and Darley to look into the bystander effect and diffusion of responsibility. I just lost my train of thought for a second there. Okay, I was going to mention, I knew I had something I was about to say. Originally, the news reporters were saying that it was a good example of how people in cities were cold, like they didn't care for each other. And Latine and Darley were trying to explain it differently. Like, no, that's not quite what it is. It might be a reflection of just the sheer number of people present. The fact that it was in broad daylight, people knew that people were home, so they just kind of assume, well, somebody's called this in, right? Surely, this is so obvious that there's a crisis. Somebody's must have called this in already. And I have my own example of this. One time there was a fire next door to my house. It was the day after New Year's. It was January 2nd, and I guess people had leftover fireworks from their New Year's celebrations. And, stray fireworks started a fire next door, and so we all run out. We're like, oh no, fire, fire. And everybody in the neighborhood, they're trying to use their garden hoses with extensions and things like that to try to help. And everybody's like, when is the fire department going to get here? When's the fire department going to get here? And I'm finally like, well, when did we call the fire department? And we realized everybody assumed that somebody was going to call the fire department. It never occurred to any of us to go ahead and make that call. We just assumed, well, somebody's done that, right? Nobody had done it. It was so many people that we had probably a diffusion of responsibility. As soon as we figured out it hadn't been done, I went and called them and they came. All right, but that's that example of that bystander effect. If it had just been the guy who was living there who discovered it, he probably would have been, trying to squirt it with the hose and yelling, yelling to his wife, hey, call the fire department. Someone needs to do that. It would have been recognized that, hey, we need to do this. We need to take care of it. All right, so that is the last of the stuff that you need to do, that you need to know about for social psychology for my students. For those who are joining from other classes, I don't know what you have to do for your classes. And then in the next chapter for my students, the next thing we're going to go over is personality.